Hopeless. I'm a senior project manager for Colliers. I am also out of the Madison office, and I am an architect by trade and doing project management now. So architect was a couple decades ago and a lifetime back. So working as a project manager now for Colliers.
Right, so Chuck, you're on.
Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen, make sure I get the right one here.
And all the board members received a PDF version of your PowerPoint.
Great. And if anybody has any questions during it, please feel free to ask questions as you go. If I don't see a hand up or anything, Tim, if you can just interrupt me, and if somebody has a question, that would be great. I love having the dialogue. So
it's not a shy group. It's not a shy group, Chuck.
I noticed. So yeah, thanks again. So we're going to start just really briefly with what is an OPM. Then we're going to kind of get into the guts of what we want to be here for. So an OPM is what we call an owner's project manager. It could be a program manager or an owner's rep. And those are all kind of intertwined together and use with each other. We're not a construction manager. So some might ask, what's the difference between you and a construction manager? And basically a construction manager is essentially that. They manage the construction. They oversee the trade contractors when it's under construction. They help us estimate, they manage phasing, and they're really responsible for that aspect of the project. Us, we help you. We're like an extension of your staff. We represent your interests in your project. We don't design it, we don't build it, we help you manage the process. You all have full-time jobs. Tim and Steve will have, you guys have a busy job managing your school and your programs. Our job is to manage the process when we're involved and essentially make your life easier, make sure you get what you're paying for. We help you with hiring consultants. We draft contracts, RFPs, RFQs. We help your town staff in the purchasing side of things. We develop budgets, as you'll see tonight. We also develop the schedules, and just basically we're, like I said, an extension of your staff for the most part. I'm a civil engineer licensed in the state of Connecticut. John's an architect as well. So we kind of cover a lot of bases on the project. And within Colliers, we also have a full complement of commissioning team that's full MEP professionals to assist us. We have 140 professionals out of our main office. So we have a lot of horsepower when we need to bring it, but not too big. So yeah, so basically just wanted to cover that. Like I said before, I specialize in John as well in the Office of School Construction Grants and Review. For those who haven't heard that terminology, it used to be the Bureau of School Facilities. And a couple others they've changed over the years, but basically they're the grant arm for the Department of Education, and they are the ones in charge of issuing grants, recommending to the legislature who receives grant funding, and they manage the process on behalf of the state. And so we have a close relationship with them. John and we were with them earlier today, discussing projects, and we think we have a pretty good handle on their process. It's ever changing. So, but with that, so with regards to, we thought we would cover a couple of key points, and this isn't all of them, but key ones to kind of help guide us through the process a little bit, and we think it's helpful to educate our clients. So when we're talking the language, we understand it a bit, and we know, when we're talking about space standards and renovation and other factors, hopefully we've educated you to follow along and understand. So on this screen is some guidelines that the state of Connecticut has passed a few years ago with, kind of what they're looking for in the process. And we're not going to read every bullet, but some of the key factors as we're looking into this process, I'm sure you've seen them. Enrollment projections and capacities of schools, SLR, formerly Malone and McBroom. They've done some work for you already, so they cover that. And the enrollment projections really, they drive a lot of the projects. When we look at the size of the school and the capacity and how much you need, the state's going to look at that. They're looking at budgets. They're looking at whether the project's ready. And what's really key is the state of Connecticut, they want to make sure you've done your homework. Have you looked at all the options? Have you looked at your district holistically in ways to either consolidate if necessary? If you need to expand, is it expanding the right capacity? But they're also interested in making sure you get all the needs you have to have in your schools, like special education programs, other special programs that you need. They are very, very sensitive to that. They want to make sure that districts have those programs within district. They want to build brick and mortar. They don't want to build portables. But essentially, again, these bullets in summary are saying, let's look at it in a holistic approach. Let's do our homework. Let's do our due diligence. That's kind of where we're at now. We also encourage meeting with them early in the process. And the earlier, the better, and to partner with that office. It's very important. If you do that, you'd be surprised how much they're willing to help you. So we're going to talk about space standards. The space standards is the statutory calculation that the state uses to determine how much they're going to reimburse you or what percentage of your rate they're going to give you. In simpler terms, it tells us what size should your buildings be within parameters. It's a statutory portion. It basically what it does is it'll take your enrollment for your grades up here at the top, and we fill in, it'll have a square footage per pupil factor that we fill in these white cells. Essentially adds them up, you divide them by the number of grades to get an average, and then you multiply that by your actual enrollment. So if you have a 600 student enrollment, it'll multiply it and tell you how many square feet the building they're willing to reimburse. Now, keep in mind with this, it's not the end all be all. They combine this with looking at your educational programming. They want to understand what are the needs in your school, and they realize that this space standard was developed many years ago and maybe not have taken into account all of the factors that need to be taken into account with today's learning environment in 2021. So this is a factor we're always kind of looking at and taking into account. OSCGR renovation status. So many times in the past, projects have been sold as a renovation project. And we're not sure if you're going to have renovation or new. We'll be talking about that a little bit. But many times in a district, they'll sell to the public as a renovation project. They'll take the total project budget, they'll multiply it by your reimbursement rate. And they'll say, this is what our share is going to be, and the state's going to reimburse us for X amount of dollars. And projects that are being renovated or altered do not automatically start as a renovation project. They start as an alteration project. In statutory, there's a statute 10-282, I believe it is, section 18, will define what renovation means. So it's very, very specific. It's not like renovating our house. It's very specific. The key point being that any building that's being renovated, at least 75% of it has to be at least 30 years of age or older. There's a couple other ones, but that's one of the key ones we look at. But you have to apply for it with the state. You can't just assume it. They want you to apply. There's about 12 points in a letter, and this is kind of the background here in these articles here. Is what some of the backup that John and I worked on in the town of Newington. And they procured renovation status before they were put on the priority list for this upcoming year. Without that status, there's a plethora of ineligible costs. Again, in an alteration project, new, it's all eligible. But there's a plethora of items that become ineligible, and what that does, it increases your district share. And it's important to understand how to navigate that water and procure renovation status. You'll have to hire an registered architect to certify the condition of the building, a structural engineer, the mechanical engineer, stating that you can bring it to a 20-year like new condition. So there's some work involved, We did that in Newington. I think, John, I think the cost on that was around $35,000.
35 million, yes.
Effort
Right, Chuck?
in that area.
Yes.
So we partnered with an architect to do that and help us with it. And for that project, it was a good candidate for it. The other way you can go about it is through notwithstanding legislation with your local legislators. OSCGR would prefer you go through them and partner with them. That's kind of going around them, and that's what has driven up some costs in the state with school construction, with districts going around them and getting relief from a lot of the statutes. So the way they've kind of cured that is they pick and they review your grant application very closely. They vet it very tightly. If you're oversized, probably not going to go on the list. If you're not on the list, you can't do the legislation because your project doesn't exist. So this is something we would keep coming back to when discussions of renovation are talked about, because many districts have gotten into construction. They start, and then the state says, you don't have renovation status, you're ineligibles or this. And they're like, that's like $7 million. We're like, yeah. And it's a big shock, and it's a big panic mode. So we'll want to avoid that, and we can help do that. So with those kind of basic parameters, and again, they're not all the factors in the project, but those are some of the key ones. And working with Tim and Steve and the team, we started looking at a couple of scenarios, and these are really based upon some of the early studies from Maloney McBroom and input from that team, and looking at, I guess, really your three remaining schools that that are in a state of the point where they need to be updated. They're tired. They're older schools, and mechanicals are getting older. The facades are getting older. The programming of those buildings, the layouts aren't necessarily as conducive as today's layouts. Certainly the mechanicals with COVID, I'm sure we're all aware of that. They're not as flexible to bring in fresh air. But these three schools is what we've been looking at in the past couple of months. The scenarios we're going to review, there are, one is renovation of Darrenowski, Flanders, and Kelly, all three. And we've developed what we call a high-low budget, and you've already seen it in your package already. We give a range because we don't have an ed spec. We don't know exactly what the scope is. So we want to give a range, just give you an idea of what those numbers will be. The other option is renovation of Darrenowski and construction of a new 600 student elementary school on the Kelly site to replace Kelly and ultimately close Flanders, with the status of that building to be determined. We don't know if it would be demolished, turned over to the town, whatever have you. That would have to be determined. We're still very early in the process, and want to stress this is very, very early. There's a lot of iterations as the process goes along. So for those who may be watching, they're going to want to stick to numbers and get married to numbers. They're going to change as this evolves. I just want to point that out. Then the last one is an option to replace Kelly and Flanders with a new 600 elementary school student enrollment at each site, and eventually close Darrenowski and turn it back. I think turn it back over to the town is the initial thought process there for it. And what we're going to do is we're going to kind of walk through those, what we think for a range of costs would be, what your district share would be, and kind of just show you order of magnitude between these, and maybe talk about them a little bit more. Any questions so far? Okay, we'll keep going then. So some of the assumptions are really key in these going forward. All the building sizes we show in the slides are gross square feet. That's to the exterior face of walls. We calculate these based upon the Connecticut Department of Education's ED 0504 form. And that's basically a fact sheet of the schools that the OSCGR will use to look at the building area. So the building area, just so you know, is the area to the inside face of exterior walls. So that thickness of the exterior walls is not included. We have to, that 5%, that 505 factor is the approximate size of exterior walls. If we don't account for that, we could be 5% short on a budget, and we don't want to do that. We've seen that happen where it's been up to about over $1 million plus escalation and a hit on a budget that we'd have to manage. The final size of the building will be based upon those ed specs I was alluding to earlier. The space standard is the guide, is what they use for reimbursement, but we have to marry that with the educational specification to come to a conclusion that fits both of those parameters, as well as the state of Connecticut reviewing it and supporting that. So those two work hand in hand in a collaborative process, and an iterative process. So hopefully those merge at the end of the day, and they're close in size. Your reimbursement rates for the 2021 year, and this is the only ones we know of so far, they haven't projected out yet, is approximately 45% for new and 55% for a renovation or alteration project. In every district, the renovation and alterations percentages are 10% higher, primarily due to the fact that you're not having to build new foundations and new structural steel. You're using the structure of the building essentially, and a lot of parts of the building associated with it. So you get a little bit less for that. We're assuming that space waivers, and a space waiver is essentially when what we're building or what we're renovating exceeds that space standard calculation we discussed. If it exceeds that number, the state would typically use that ratio of what the space standard is to building. So if your space standard was 90,000 square feet and we wanted to build 100, that's a ratio of 0.9. We would take that 0.9 and multiply it by one of these two ratios to give you your actual reduced reimbursement ratio. So that's another hit. We want to make sure we get that. We're assuming that would be the case in these, and that we're right sized. If at the end of the day they're not there, we'll have to work on that. So just wanted to put that out there. Our enrollment values are based upon Malone McBroom's report from June 2019. Those eventually have to be updated as we move along, but for now we're using those. And I think we're seeing your enrollment be fairly steady. So for it, we have not included any temporary portables due to either phasing or increases in enrollment at this time in the renovation numbers. Those can be costly if you have to rent those, but we don't know at this time, so we just want to put that clause on that. Renovations assume the status, as I mentioned earlier, would be granted by the OSCGR. Otherwise, it's a alteration status as default, and that increases the ineligibles, and that would have to be determined what that is. We also, in the district share calculator, we assume that in every project there's ineligibles. Just want to point that out. Many districts assume we don't have any ineligibles. It's a new project. There's always ineligibles. Any work outside the property line of the project is ineligible. If you tie in for utilities, sidewalks, roadway repairs outside the property line, that is ineligible, and it's estimated. They average, typically we see 5 to 10% on a project, so we're using 7.5 because that will come off the top of the project cost. So if it's 50 million, we'll take off the 7.5%. The resulting eligible cost is what they'll calculate your reimbursement on. And one of the really important ones is we don't include financing costs, bonding costs, short-term interest costs. As the project progresses and we develop a budget, John will put together a beautiful cash flow for you because he's an expert in that now. But we'll basically develop a cash flow that ties in with your project schedule. We'll give it to your director of finance or your bond counsel to help integrate that into your total town debt service. And they'll advise us what type of carrying costs we should carry, and we'll incorporate that into the budget. And that expense can be charged against the project. It's 100% ineligible, as are legal fees. But that's the cost that we just don't know at this time, and we'd have to work with your finance department on. So those are the assumptions. So we're gonna get right into scenario one. So this is the option to renovate Darrenowski and renovate all 3 schools, Darrenowski, Flanders, and Kelly. And hopefully you get the printout and you can see this okay on your screen. So in the Daranoski School, that school's, as you can see, about 134,000 gross square feet, very large building, beautiful building, by the way. We walked through it. A lot of character, a lot of historic attributes to it. Beautiful space. However, your current enrollment and projected enrollments around 600 students in that building. If we were to fill that building up to the Space Center, you would need approximately 1,000 students plus or minus. The ratio now, as you can see, is about 59%. That's very, very low. The state would want to see that in the low 90s, ideally, if not higher, in order to consider it consider giving a grant commitment whatsoever. Anything that low, the building's too big, and we don't suspect that they would support a grant commitment for that project. However, so as you can see in the estimated district share, those match the budgets to renovate that. We estimate anywhere from $63 million to $78 million. Again, that's with some assumptions. There's not a lot of site costs associated with it because of the nature of the site. It does take into account asbestos abatement on a square foot basis that would have to be determined, and that might modify. We carry this to midpoint of construction, which is around 2025 right now is what we're assuming. That we don't suspect would be supported by the state. Flanders and Kelly, they're sister schools, they're the same size. We estimate those to be roughly between 24 and 30 million apiece. Again, assuming a renovation status for those in the ineligibles we discussed. We estimate the district share to be $11.5 to $14.5 million for each of those. And again, the final cost to the district is always subject to the state audit. Very important. The state of Connecticut will not allow you to cap bonding costs. You have to approve the 100% of the cost up front, and they do not cap them. Again, some districts assume they are not. So total, for this option, your budget ranges are from roughly 110 million to 137 million. Again, those can modify a little bit, but we're pretty comfortable with those. And your district share would be about 86 million to 107 million roughly on that. So a lot of you're bearing a lot of the cost in our estimation on this. We noted Flanders Space Center is only about 80%, so we'd have to discuss that with the state and work with them on that. I think with special your special ed and other programs that might be in there, we might be able to get to there. And Kelly's about 87% there. And again, key thing is with these, you would have to procure renovation status from OSCGR. That's not guaranteed. Any questions on those before I move to the next one? Any hands up, Tim? No. Okay, I'll move on to scenario 2. If we have to, we can go back. Scenario 2, in this one, we'd be, again, renovating Daranoski. Again, similar condition there as scenario 1. Replacing Kelly with a new elementary school for approximately 600 students from K to 5. And basically abandoning Flanders, turn it back over to the town for the town to do as they will. As we noted, the space standard again is only 59% for Daranoski. It's larger than the population is holding. So we don't think the state would support that. A new Kelly Elementary School, we assume essentially the population from Flanders would move to there. We'd have to, there might be some redistricting lines that SLR, Malone, McBroom would have to work on, but that's what we're assuming at this point for the size. And it either Flanders demolished and say, we put actually 2.5 million, I'm sorry, 2.5 million. We assume if it was to be demolished and restored, 2.5 to 3 million is what we would suspect on that. Maybe not, but that's a minor cost in the overall. In this scenario, total project budget would be roughly 115 to 141 million for this option. The estimated district share, actually the 2.5 and 3 million should be in the district share, so it'd be a little bit higher. So it'd be roughly 90 million to 110 million. We estimate to be the district share in this scenario. Again, a lot of assumptions. a lot of work to be done, but this is again giving you an order of magnitude and kind of get an idea what these would be for that. Right, and then scenario 3, this would be replacing Flanders and Kelly with a 600 student enrollment each, so total of 1,200 between the two. Those numbers may tweak up or down depending on how the redistricting would look for the town. Each of these buildings, the gross square foot would be anywhere from 79,000 to roughly 87,000. The variation there, just so you know, is the low gross square foot is the space standard calculation multiplied by the 1.05. That's for the exterior walls. That's the minimum you're going to build. You're not going to build less. The high takes into account an additional 10% square footage for impacts to program from the educational specification. We want to make sure we give this range, and it's also a factor of dollars per square foot on the building as well as the site. Again, since we haven't studied the site, we don't have a layout, we don't have a design, we're making some high level assumptions based upon historic values we've seen with other projects of elementary schools, specifically South Windsor Public Schools. We work there. We've just completed 3 there, a few schools down in Stillington, Connecticut. So we have some pretty good recent guidelines and basis for the cost. Total project budget for those roughly $50 to $60 million in high level costs, with total cost $98 to $121 million. Your district share, again, this is that lower reimbursement rate. We're assuming 7.5% ineligible still, because there's always ineligible in every single project. Can't stress that enough. But using the 35%, your district share is estimated to be 57 to 70 million in this scenario. Now, again, this does not account for if Daranoski is taken offline, if there's any additional town costs for insuring, heating, electricity. We have not taken that into account at all in this. This is just turning it back over to the town. Whatever costs associated with that are not included here. So just to clarify there. So again, no portables, assuming for Flanders. In the scenarios when we looked with the committee, Kelly's got a very nice site actually. And if anybody's seen the parcel, it's roughly, I think, 23, 24 acres, John. Kelly.
Yeah, about 24, Chuck.
And its geometry seems to fit well, just on observation, where we think you'd be able to build the school behind it while the school is occupied. If anybody's seen the parcel at Flanders, it's kind of shaped like a figure 8. It's kind of 2 different sites and they connect in the middle with a skinny waist. And where that building is, initially looking at it, it looks like the building's located where it should be, ideally on the site. But as these progress, and if they move down the line a little bit further, we'd recommend hiring an architectural team to do a test fit and a test layout to see what's possible. But again, this is very high level at this moment. Let's see, I'm looking at any other, again, all these are in thousands here as well. And I don't think there's any other assumptions we need to review at this moment. So in summary, with these scenarios, scenarios 1 and 2 basically range from 110 to 140 million, with a district share of 87 million to roughly 110. Again, that's an estimate. In 1 and 2, district share is higher because of Daranoski. If you were to renovate that, again, we'd have to talk to the state, but we don't suspect that they would support a renovation project there due to the enrollment, unless you moved a lot of kids into that building to justify that. They probably wouldn't support it. In scenario 3, the budget range is 100 to 121 million, with a district share of 57 to 70 million estimated. So that's obviously quite a bit less than the scenarios 1 and 2 in that regard. So that's a really simple, high-level overview of these initial options. It's not to say they're the only ones, but these are, again, I think, an order of magnitude to give this group an idea of kind of what's available, what's out there with those. And so with that, I think go to questions and answers.
Do we have any
Share.
board members with questions? I don't think I see any hands, or do I? Am I missing something?
Give me a second.
Was that you, Dave?
This is me, yep.
Okay.
Yeah, great presentation, a lot of detail. I want to thank you for that. One question I have is, as a OPM, is there a fee or is there a cost associated with that for the town?
Yes, there is. So there's two phases, just to kind of explain the phases. So there's, we could be involved, and many times we are involved with assisting with the planning of a project. We call it pre-referendum services. Just to clarify, any services, whether it's us, an architect, or other services up to referendum, are not eligible for reimbursement. Just to clarify that. After referendum, they're eligible. But yes, there are costs associated with that if we were to assist you. Those ranges can range anywhere from 60 to 100,000, depending on the level of efforts and the specifics of a program for that. And we could certainly provide more detail to you if you needed it. Post-referendum, our fees have ranged roughly around, in Connecticut, roughly about 1%. It's in Connecticut, and OPM is not required. A lot of districts do use them. In Massachusetts and Rhode Island, they are required by law. They have to hire an OPM first, and we're on full-time. The fees are much higher for that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from board members? I don't think I see any. I thank you both for coming back and presenting this to the entire board. The ad hoc committee will continue. Mr. Cannella and I would assume Mrs. Clark will be calling meetings. We are just obviously in our preliminary stages of discussing all of this at this point. I don't know, Mr. Cannella, do you have anything else you wanted to say about this?
No, I was just going to, I'll echo what you just said, Mrs. Carmody, and thanks to Chuck and John for coming back. I know the committee really wanted this information to be shared with the full board. Yeah,
Right.
as a board, and then as a community, we're really at the stages where the dialogue is beginning. And I think it's really important that the board was able to see information relative to some of those specific items, such as what it takes to weave through the web of the state bureaucracy, and what it takes to get a project forward, and then what some relative costs will be, knowing full well that this is 2021 and any project is going to be out in the future, so costs are going to vary. I've had a number of conversations with Chuck about this, saying it's really important for people to understand and not to latch on to any costs that were identified this evening. These were figures that are estimates based on reasonable structures, but certainly any project that the board ultimately decides on is going to have some differences from what you saw tonight. But I think those were pretty good examples, and both Chuck and John are certainly able to provide additional information with regard to how those budgets are developed. They did that for the committee. We didn't think that was necessary to do this evening, and what the space standard actually looks like. They also did that for the committee. Tonight was just a general presentation on those two items. I think it was important for the board to see the big picture, if you will, and that's what's going to stimulate the conversation going forward. And board's going to have a key decision to make in terms of what the recommendation is going to be to the town, and what the dialogue is going to be, in terms of doing the best thing for this community for the next 50 years or so. So it's a huge responsibility, and it's a good start. I think I'm not going to speak for the committee members, but I think the meetings that we had with the committee members, with both Chuck and John, were pretty productive. There was good dialogue, and I do think it's a good start.
So once again, I thank both of you.
All right, well, thank you for your time. And if there's any questions, certainly pass them through. There's a lot of detail behind all this information, of course, and we'd be happy to share any of that with you.
Okay, thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Have a
John.
good evening.
Thanks, John.
Next on our agenda, Mrs. Clark, do you have, where are you? Up here. Okay, I see you. Can you hear me, Colleen?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. Yes, I'm going to ask you to move on to our healthy food certificate. Some motions for me, please.
Sure. I would like to move to rescind the May 28th, 2020 healthy food certification motion voted on by the Board of Education.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Do I have any opposed?
Nope.
I want to make sure I see everyone. Do I have anyone opposed?
Yeah, I had a question. What, is there a reason why we're rescinding this?
Mhm.
Mrs.
Sherry,
Danilo? Yeah.
Sure, I'd be happy to take that. So last spring in May of 2020, the Board of Education made these two motions, which we still would like you to make, and you'll see that motion 3 and 4 are coming up this evening. What happened is we used the same language that we used in the spring of 2019. You recall in May, we were all working remotely at that time. After these motions are made, we have to share these minutes with the child nutrition program. And upon reviewing the minutes, they noticed that the motion that was made did not contain all of the language required to participate in the healthy food certification. So what we're asking you to do is to rescind the two motions that were made in May of 2020. And there's two new motions for the 2021 school year that read exactly the way the state wants them to read in order to participate. And I'll just add that in the next month or two, you'll be seeing similar motions coming before you. Motions need to be made and submitted to the state prior to July 1st.
So it's just a change in language to meet the requirements of the state, Sherry.
Yes,
Basic-
everything we're asking for is exactly the same. It's just further clarification in the motion.
Okay,
We
thank you.
didn't use enough words, in other words.
Okay. Or the-
Exactly.
The motions were too brief. So may I make the next motion,
Yes,
Madam
go ahead,
Chair?
please, Colleen, thank you.
Okay, because this is a
Excuse
little,
me,
yes.
You need to vote.
Point of order.
Oh, I'm sorry, we didn't vote.
There wasn't a vote, correct?
Yeah.
Vote.
Oh, we didn't vote?
Nope.
No.
Wait a minute. So what are you telling me? I have to take a vote on
So,
that?
Yeah.
On the
So the-
first
so-
motion.
correct,
There
there was a,
was, the first motion, I'm sorry, Colleen made the motion and Zaya.
Second it.
And I said, were there any, I said, all those in favor?
and then Mr. Darrenowski asked a question.
Afterwards,
Oh.
yeah.
Okay, so now I have to ask again.
And since it's difficult to see everyone, Mrs. Blanchard can easily do a roll call vote.
Okay, go
And
ahead.
that
I'm
way
sorry.
that way you'll have it recorded properly.
All right, thank you, Mr. Kennellan.
All right, we need the second motion to be made or on to
The-
the next agenda item?
Just the first one.
Just the
one
first,
will-
you have to, we have to
Do-
vote on the first one again, Linda. So could you do a roll call?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Mr. Bashevsky. Mr. Bashevsky, I saw you there. Where did he go?
He is on mute and he is not in his chair. Joe, can you come back and vote, please? Joe? Oh, great.
Okay, all right, on. Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Charnowski. Mr. Charles,
Oh, can you hear me?
Can't hear you, James. Okay.
okay. Mrs. Clark,
Yes.
Mr. Darrenowski,
Yes.
Mr. Arshana,
Yes.
Mrs. Carmody,
Yes,
and back to Mr. Bashevsky.
not back.
No, but he did originally when you did the voice vote, he did agree.
He did agree. You heard that in, well,
Yes.
Well, there's still six votes.
Still
so the
enough votes,
motion
yeah.
does pass,
Yeah.
correct.
So we're okay.
all right, Colleen, go on with the. other,
Okay.
please.
The next motion pursuant to Connecticut General Statute, Section 10-2 215F, the Board of Education or governing authority certifies that all food items offered for sale to students in the schools under its jurisdiction and not exempted from the Connecticut Nutrition Standards published by the Connecticut State Department of Education will comply with the Connecticut Nutrition Standards during the period of July 1st, 2020 through July 30th, 2021. The certification shall include all food offered for sale to students separately from reimbursable meals at all times and from all sources, including but not limited to school stores, vending machines, school cafeterias, culinary programs, any fundraising activities on school premises sponsored by the school or non-school organizations and groups.
second,
I guess you better do a roll call vote on that one too, Linda, if you don't mind, please.
Yep, Mr. Bashevsky, I believe he's still gone.
Yep.
Mr. Brown,
yes.
Mr. Charnesky. Mr.
James, we can't hear you. No, we can't.
Can't hear you.
Okay,
A thumbs up from Mr. Shanowski.
Mrs. Clark,
Yes.
Mr. Dearnowski,
Yes,
Mr. Oshana,
Yes,
Mrs. Carmody,
Yes.
and Joe's not back yet. Okay.
Nope. Okay.
Colleen, one more, I think? Or
Two more, dear. Two more.
Two more, I'm sorry. Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Move to rescind the May 28th, 2020 food exemption motion voted on by the Board of Education.
second,
Roll call vote again, Linda, please.
Joe's back. Mr.
Joe.
Bashevsky,
We missed you for 2 votes.
Well, we're
Mr.
on right
Bishop?
now to 4C, Joe.
or C,
4C, Joe. on
I'll
the
go out-
healthy food.
I'll give him time. Mr.
Okay,
Brown,
great. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
That's okay. You know what?
Mr.
yes,
Brown,
yes,
Let's stay with this one right now, Linda, okay?
Mr. Bashevsky, are you prepared?
I am. I had reviewed it earlier. I'm a yes. Yep.
Okay. Mr. Charnosky?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
yes,
All right. So I guess it's
Mrs.
this mic.
Mrs. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Dearnowski?
yes,
Mr. Oshana?
yes,
Mrs. Carmody?
Yes.
Passes.
Does Mr. Bajewski know that he just voted yes to serving surf and turf in the high school cafeteria for the remainder of the year?
No,
That's exactly what I voted yes to. So I'm perfectly fine with that. As long as it's, the stone lobster tail, none of this like regular Maine lobster. Okay.
Okay.
is there a
Last-
vegan option?
No.
All right, Can we move along? please?
Sorry.
All
Focus,
right.
focus.
Come on, focus, people. All right, the last motion. The Board of Education or governing authority will allow the sale to students of food items that do not meet the Connecticut nutrition standards, provided that the following conditions are met. 1, the sale is in connection with an event occurring after the end of the regular school day or on the weekend. 2, the sale is at a location of the event. And 3, the food items are not sold from a vending machine or a school store. An event is an occurrence that involves more than just a regularly scheduled practice, meeting, or extracurricular activity. For example, soccer games, school plays, and interscholastic debates are events, but soccer practices, play rehearsals, and debate team meetings are not. The regular school day is the period from midnight before to 30 minutes after the end of the official school day. Location means where the event is being held.
Second,
Okay, roll call, Linda, please.
Mr. Bashevsky?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
yes,
Mr. Charles,
Yes.
Mrs. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Dearnowski?
yes,
Mr. Oshana?
yes,
Mrs. Carmody?
Yes. Colleen, is that it or is there one more?
Nope, that's it.
That's it? Okay.
Mhm.
Barry, that's it
Thank
for
you
all?
all, and I apologize that yes, thank you very much. I apologize that you needed to go through this. And as I said, somebody will have a mouthful of motions to make in the next 2 months in regards to next school year.
We can do it, Mrs. Danello. We can do it.
We're good, Sherry.
Yes.
Thank you. So, Mr. Darrenowski, I think you have a motion to make.
Yeah, move to go into executive session excluding the public and the press for the purpose of discussing personnel matters and contracts.
Second,
Motion, go
All
back
those
into
in
open
favor?
aye.
Aye.
Okay, see you all in a few minutes. Take a little break and we'll meet in a few minutes, okay?
Okey doke.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Thank you.
everybody.